Good morning. Myself, Christine Maley, Michael Brunson, Financial Secretary, Recording Secretary of the CTU, and our Legislative Director, our Political Director, Stacey Davis Gates, just came down from the 12th floor where Mayor Rahm Emanuel was delivering a photo op about bringing tech jobs to the city of Chicago. We went up there to try to ask him some basic questions and point out some missing facts about the pension deal that the city has recently announced. We have grave reservations about this deal. It's a bad deal for tens of thousands of city employees, including almost 10,000 members of the Chicago Teachers Union. The CT was never been involved in the negotiations around this deal, would never been at the table with the mayor or the Chicago Public Schools about this deal. The calculations which we have done concerning the effect that these deep pension cuts would have on a retiree, on a public servant who spent a lifetime working for the city of Chicago, our calculations show that it would cut more than a third out of the actual value of their pension, so that someone who retired now with the average municipal benefit pension of about $32,000, in inflation-adjusted terms would be making about $22,000 in real terms 20 years from now. This is a draconian cut. We think this amounts to balancing the city's budgets on the backs of some of the poorest people who in the city who are least able to afford these kind of attacks. We think that if the mayor wants to really make real pension reform, he needs to talk more honestly about creative ways of finding revenue, and not just taxing homeowners, but looking at taxes on luxury services, looking at taxes on people who make over $1 million a year, looking at some of the taxes on financial transactions, trying to be creative about ways to solve the revenue problem in this city. We're also very disappointed that this pension deal, as announced, doesn't have any real promises of revenue and funding. It repeats the same old promise that's been made that the city will live up to its obligations, which is a promise, frankly, that city employees have heard before. And we're very disappointed that the mayor wouldn't even take our questions. That frankly we were just kicked out of the room rather than in the event upstairs. So we're trying to talk to you now about some of the reality behind this this terrible deal. We have this is the figure that we'd like people to see, and I'll pass out copies of this. But basically, what it shows is that over time, the pension deal that was just announced amounts to a massive cut in the living standard of retirees who are on fixed incomes, retirees who spent their lifetime working for the city of Chicago. These are numbers which I don't even think the mayor's office even ran. They certainly haven't talked about them. This is the real cost of what pension cuts and attacks mean for our members and for the members of other unions in the city. Talk a little bit more about the facts behind this as Stacey Davis Gates, our political director.
Stacey Davis Gates, Political Director, Chicago Teachers Union. Spell it. Stacey, S-T-A-C-Y, Davis, D-A-V-I-S, Gates, G-A-T-E-S, no hyphen. Thank you all for coming today. As Vice President Sharkey just said, that these draconian cuts are more of the same on the same people who had to absorb 50 school closings, people who've had to absorb mental health clinic closings, that this mayor only knows how to cut and does not know how to properly resource schools. We still have 160 without libraries. These people are our lunch ladies. These people are our janitors. These people are our teachers' aides. These people live overwhelmingly on the south and west sides of this city. This is another example of disinvestment. This is a terrible deal for these people, and we intend to fight it with every fiber of our union. Our members are enraged by this. We were not at the table. We have to continue to repeat the fact that we were not at the table for this. As the Democratic Party begins to message on the minimum wage and how the minimum wage is a policy that will be beneficial to women and be beneficial to children, well, these are the same women who work in our school buildings. These are the same women who will work for a lifetime and will end up in poverty during retirement. These same women deserve equity. These same women deserve the respect of a deal that makes sense for them. Our retirees, by and large, remain in the city of Chicago after retirement. These wages will impact the communities in which they live as they support small businesses in the city, as they support the overall local economy. This, again, is a terrible bill for our city, for our members, for anyone who works in the city. As you know, the women who work in these schools are women who serve in some of the lower wage jobs. These are black women, these are Latino women, these are the same women who send their students or their children to the Chicago public schools. These are the same women who've had to absorb school closings. These are the same women who wake up early and go to sleep late. If there is not an ethic to care for the citizens of Chicago, then I don't know what we're doing with city government.
We'll take a few questions.
Jesse, they said that the unions designated who was going to be at the table, and the CTU was at the table.
That's simply not correct. We're talking now about the Municipal Employees Annuity and Benefit Fund, the MEABF. This is a fund that has a little bit under 10,000 Chicago Teachers Union members. Anyone who works in a school who's a paraprofessional, that is, they're a clerk, a classroom assistant, a person who, a school aide, that is, there's a whole number of positions that aren't certificated positions that work in the schools. Those are CTU members, and the CTU was not represented in any of those negotiations.
Well, let's go to your pension negotiations. Sure. It's been reported in the media this week that you and the city were close to a deal on pension reform for teachers. Is that true?
No.
And if it's never true,
it's absolutely
didn't
incorrect.
happen. You
That's
weren't
correct.
hours away from an agreement.
That's correct.
Were you at all close to an agreement?
It's obvious that the Chicago Teachers Union wants to figure out, get some commitments from the political powers that be, most specifically the mayor, about some commitments for funding to try to make the pension funds work going into the future. But so discussions about that, and we've been talking, we've been sitting at the table.
A different table, though.
A different table, that's correct. And what those discussions have always lacked is any kind of a real commitment from the city about even ideas, really, so much less commitment about revenue. And that's been a real stumbling block.
But you talked about cuts. You talked about what you would be willing to give if they were willing to come up with something. What were the parameters of what you were talking about?
So let me just sort of like push back on that, because the way this has sort of been posed is the union should do a trust fall. They should agree to 30% reduction after literally decades of broken funding promises in exchange for a promise that funding ideas are going to come later. And we're just not in a position where that's a non-starter for us. We actually need to see some commitment about revenues in order for us to be in a position to do real negotiations.
Jesse, what does the commitment of revenue, how does that look different from what you're talking about versus this property tax increase over 5 years that the mayor has proposed?
Well, I haven't seen any written language on the property tax increase other than there's going to be one. And what I understand is the actual legislation about that what will be taxed. What does that mean? What types of property are taxed and how much? But that's legislation that would follow later after the cuts have been agreed to. That's the way this has been reported, and to us, that's an unacceptable deal, because it's a legislative cut which is going to drastically affect retirees in exchange for a promise that there's going to be some revenue stream that's going to come along later.
Is there really going to be something that you will agree? Do you see that change is likely? Can you imagine that you would accept some kind of change?
There's a political reality here, which is that the mayor has gotten a tremendous amount of financial backing from very wealthy people around this country, but also in the city of Chicago. And I don't know, maybe there's talk about a millionaire's tax in the state of Illinois. If there's winds of change that are really blowing, and there's a willingness on the part of the people who've done very well over the past 2 decades in this city, whose real estate, the value of their real estate holdings has gone up by several 100%, the value of their incomes has gone up, the value of their stock portfolio returns has gone up by tons. If those people are willing to make some sacrifice and put in some put in some revenue, then I suspect that anything is possible. But up to this point, we've seen every solution either be aimed at cuts on the part of public employees or increased fees that are aimed at homeowners, many of whom are struggling on the same kind of fixed incomes that our members are. Many of whom are our members. So I don't see a real political willingness yet on the part of the city or the city administration or frankly other political leaders to tackle what I think is at the heart of the issue.
But Jesse, you've talked about the restoration of the pension tax. Wouldn't that also be taxing homeowners?
There are going to be a number of tax solutions that we're going to see. We'll look at all of them. I don't know exactly what that would look like. I haven't seen language on it. I know that we're sort of throwing out a number of ideas. We're saying, what about a tax on luxury services? We proposed it. Someone might say, well, what service are you talking about? What constitutes a luxury tax? There'd be a series of questions that would be fair questions that, frankly, those would be the subject of a willing negotiation. If someone said, we're behind that idea, this is the kind of framework that could actually produce revenue that could help solve get us out of the box that we're in. But frankly, those are the kinds of things which I'd expect the mayor, with his energy and creativity, so-called, to be working on solving. Instead, what we've seen is sort of this problem being solved with cuts.
So one other question on that. Are you concerned that with the mayor talking about a property tax increase over 5 years, that once he proposes that, it takes away from the restoration of the pension tax? Is that the concern?
Well, look, one of the things that would be very damaging to labor is if the way this is posed is there's a finite pot of money, and the first person to cut a deal and agree to make big cuts out of the members is going to get the pot of money, and then at the end, nothing else is going to be left over. The reality is that we have an extremely wealthy society, and there's big parts of our society that have done extremely well over the last 10, 20 years. And we're trying to raise the political question about how do those sacrifices get shared? Who shares broader set of sacrifices in our society? And that it can't just be homeowners, and it can't just be our annuitants, our retirees.
How does the
Let
municipal
me take the last question.
How does the municipal pension plan kind of impact or interact with your talks over teacher pensions? Does it affect that at all? Does it change the way you approach the negotiating table at all?
Well, look, on the one hand, it's a separate fund, it's governed by a separate set of laws. But on the other hand, obviously, there's some precedent to be set here. And, so it's not just that there's 10,000 members of the Chicago Teachers Union who are affected by this fund. It's also that there's a whole bunch of other negotiations. There's negotiations with fire, there's negotiations with the police, and there's negotiations with the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund, all of which we care about.
But does this put pressure on you to come to the table as well? Or for there to be meaningful negotiations between you and the city? Does this ratchet up the pressure?
I don't know if they've got a deal that will hold water here. What we're saying is that from our point of view, it doesn't. I don't think they got a constitutional deal, and I don't think they have a deal that will fly politically, because it leaves out some very important constituents, namely many of the members that work in the schools that are our members.